So, all movements that take place, especially their grassroots movements, are crippled by the system to which we find ourselves. That crippling takes place in multiple ways. In one case, you can have a man like Jeff Bezos that has $176 billion, and just the very space, almost like gravity around him in the economic and political system that we find ourselves, that allows influence. The very fact that he controls those companies, that newspaper, and has that much wealth gives influence. One man, that much power. In the other scheme of things, you have a system where it is difficult to form political parties, meaning the two political parties have a racket that they don't necessarily want anybody honing in on. So things like ranked choice voting, or for that matter, an entire new political party in and of itself doesn't apply. Ultimately, you have two parties that are basically arguing gradations of the same understanding and viewpoint of the world, with the media space pretending as if the two gradations are somehow tantamount to being political differences. Yes, they are, but they're political differences in a minor sort of way of people who basically agree on the basics of the underlying reality to which we find ourselves. That's somewhat different than having somebody that have a different point of view, somebody, like a Sanders, that could actually give an alternate point of view in regards to our political space. Well, that had to be done away with, and that was indeed done away with. There's also a ton of cash that's required in order to get movements off the ground, even grassroots movements. After all, they need to have flyers, they need to have buildings in which to congregate, they need to have the ability to get on television, or for that matter, to have rallies and so forth. They need cash. And so in this system where you have to get all of these people on the same page to care about an issue, and then to somehow get money donated from these people who are poor to use in your issue, you could see that there are a lot of roadblocks just trying to get something off the ground and doing something decent. Add to that this. George Soros, the man who's at the origin of many conspiracy theories about him, is giving $220 million to black-led groups throughout the United States. Let me repeat that. Soros is giving $220 million, flooding those groups to push for racial equality. Now, considering who Soros is, and considering the amount of odd stuff that is made and said about him, this is only going to add to that. And in an odd way, I am somewhat appalled and somewhat embarrassed that Soros is even doing this. And I know that's somewhat of an odd reaction, but it's an honest reaction in regards to the way I view this. I view it in a hostile way. Even though I would imagine some people who are in the political disposition that looks at this says, why are you considering this hostile? I'm going to explain why after the flip over. And I also want to go into the details of this because it's interesting to say the least. But there's something that's kind of underlying this that bugs me about it that we should discuss. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or, for that matter, Patreon. I'm not going to keep this video long, but I did want to point to this because this was in the news and I thought it was somewhat of an interesting dynamic. So, of the $220 million, the foundation will invest $150 million in 5-year grants for selected groups, including progressive and emerging organizations like Black Voters Matter Fund and Repairers of the Breach, a group founded by Reverend Dr. Barker II of the Poor People's Campaign. The money will also support more established black political organizations like the Equal Justice Initiative, which was founded by civil rights lawyer Brian Stevenson and depicted in the 2019 movie Just Mercy. The Open Society Foundation will invest in an additional $70 million in local grants supporting changes in policing and criminal justice. This money will also be used to pay for opportunities for civic engagement and to organize internships and political training for young people. Now, immediately, people are going to say he is going to have undue control. You're also going to have people who are basically saying there's also going to be, conspiracy theories that surround this. And basically, you can also make a case that Soros is doing what any other capitalist does, that is okay with issues of civil rights from the standpoint of justice stuff, because those specific issues of civil rights, if you talk about them a particular way, can be severed from issues of class. Those things that would directly address the inequalities that he has this money in the first place. Look, whatever you want to think about Soros, these groups are going to take that money and these groups are going to say thank you for that money. Whether that gives Soros undue control in these groups, I would imagine that the moment that you're suckling on the tit, that you're going to want to continue to suckle on that tit, especially if you get processes in order that depends on that money to continue to come in. Will it give undue control? I would imagine that answer would just have to be, by definition, almost yes. Does it mean that these groups won't do good work? I would imagine Reverend Barker and the Poor People's Campaign would probably do good work with those funds. It must be said, though, that it's somewhat appalling that a billionaire has this much cash to basically drop $220 million on a whim on all of these various organizations. It's not so much that I'm saying those groups shouldn't take the money. I'm saying that the fact that a billionaire felt he needed to do that, had the ability to do that, in and of itself is somewhat appalling. And it's almost embarrassing to me as an American to stand by and watch that take place. You can say, why I had that reaction? The reaction is what it is. Is there any such thing anymore as we the people? Meaning us as a country. Is there any such thing as we the people? Is everything just politicized now? Or are there things that all of us as human beings value and can organize ourselves around? And remove the political space from this for the moment, if you knew that there were people who were living on the street or were going to be thrown on the street, or if you knew that people didn't have money to make ends meet, didn't have money to pay for their kids to do this or to do that, or were living in situations that were violent or that were dangerous, if you knew that you had elements of your society living in a difficult spot, would you, if you had God's ability, do something about those people living in those situations? Now, I've met people who would look at those situations and say that people need to have some kind of worth. They need to do something in order to deserve living somewhere or having a decent meal or inhaling clean air or living in a safe environment. Now, I don't buy that. If we as a society decide that we're going to bring human beings into the society, then we should have also the responsibility of recognizing as a collective society that we need to ensure that those people are continually made whole. That poverty is not necessarily something that a generation ever has to grow up dealing with. That is something we eradicate off the face of the earth. Now, our government chooses not to do that. Our government chooses to use money on other stuff and then to basically never bring up those issues of economics and poverty. The only difference in this particular election season is Sanders ran in the last two elections, so they're forced to have this conversation. But I was around before Sanders, and I remember economics was not something that was necessarily up for grabs in any real, meaningful, material terms. In this case, 95% of the wealth under Obama went to the top 1%. Right now, with 44 million people out of work, you have the billionaire class that is bringing in more than $500 billion. Trump is going to best those numbers of 95%. Now, this ostentatious show of wealth, where he just drops $220 million, basically is doing the job that we, as a society, is supposed to do. And if we had the God's ability to ensure that those situations weren't as horrendous as those situations were, we should take action to do so. Now, that requires a large number of people, that gets a large number of people moving, that gets a large number of amount of attention that is focused on a particular point at a particular spot. But At the end of the day, I would imagine that the majority of the population would prefer people not to live in those situations. And we get into our political mindset that gets us almost impossible to move on those things. In real terms, though, if Jeff Bezos, and I'm not picking on Bezos, maybe I am, but if Jeff Bezos, with a great idea and a ton of money from the bank, sat in a warehouse, Jeff Bezos has no capacity to make any money at all. The only way Jeff Bezos can make money is if human beings fill those places, if those streets are paved for those trucks to be able to go from point A to point B, if the air is clean, if the education that those people who shop at those stores and for the most part work at those stores wasn't necessarily being done by the federal government, or wasn't being done by the government, that stuff may not necessarily happen, especially with people who couldn't necessarily afford it. I am making the point that in order for Jeff Bezos to have $176 billion, Jeff Bezos needed human beings to work at those stores, human beings to make those products, all sorts of human ingenuity from the standpoint of intellectual labor that went into crafting the products, and from the standpoint of physical labor that went into moving those products from point A to point B. They required a police force to keep this place safe. They required a fire department to keep this place safe from fires. All of those things went into Jeff Bezos getting $176 billion. And Bezos expropriated that much wealth from those workers. To then take wealth that should have been given to the people who were intrinsically necessary for you to get that much wealth in the first place, and then dote it over the society. And I know we're talking about Soros, but Soros basically made money off of making money off of basically making money off of money. But I'm picking on Jeff Bezos because I'm making the point that in order for any of these people to have this much cash, policy, rules, regulation, and just basically run-of-the-mill corruption plays a role and plays a part in that stuff. For the amount of labor that we put into making this society what this society is, and for that much of the wealth to be expropriated to the top, there's a problem with a system that does that, and that continually does that. That needs to be addressed. And unfortunately, that is not one of the things that seem to be getting addressed. And yet, you would have Soros dropping money in this particular fashion. My point is that they get that wealth from expropriating that wealth from human beings in the society itself. Meaning, instead of the society having that cash in order to ensure that those people have the health care that they need, have the end-of-life care that they need, meaning as they get to the elderly years, have the schooling that they need, instead of using that wealth for the benefit of the people of that society, that wealth basically gets locked in a vault somewhere where they can swim in it like Scrooge McDuck. So the money is not necessarily appropriated for the conditions that the society needs it to be appropriated for. It is appropriated for their benefit of just staring at it. This is a role for government. That's my point. And it is emasculating. It's almost like a cuck for somebody to come in and basically do a job that your government should be doing. And frankly, your government would have to do if it is to be done appropriately and to be done well. So, I understand that a lot of people are going to say, hey, that's great that a lot of this money is going into these groups. And I'm not necessarily begrudging any of these groups from taking the cash. It's nothing like that. These groups have their own needs in order to stay open, and they make their own choices in regards to what they think they can accept versus not accept. But I will say that this is a job for our society as a whole. And the question for our society is basically, can we get rid of poverty? The answer to that is yes. And what I promise you is if you ensure that kids can go to school whenever they want to go to school, do you think that would increase the number of people who go to school or decrease it? Meaning, do you think that would incentivize schooling or disincentivize it? Well, of course, the answer to that is incentivize it. If you have more people that are going to school because of that incentive, are you by definition, just based on probability alone, going to have more people that are likely to start new businesses, start new engines of creativity and new ideas in regards to what they want to accomplish in the world and what they can put into the world in regards to technology or otherwise? I'm making the point that if we incentivize and prioritize education in our society, you will get, by definition, almost by law of probability, more people engage in those affairs that benefit our society as a whole. If you ensure that your society has health care, does that mean to some degree, on some probabilistic scale, that you're going to get increased numbers of people with better health? The answer, of course, has to be yes. My point is, if you have the capacity as a government to get rid of issues of poverty and to get rid of this notion of people having lack of something, or for that matter, always being put in the straits of being in the conditions of unsafe conditions, you're going to get certain outcomes that are not necessarily going to be to the best of the society. It's almost like an alienation effect. By the same token, your government can take actions, even in the context of a capitalistic system, to ensure that those people have health care, those people have life care when they get older, and when those people wanted to go to school, they can go to school to the degree that they want to go to school. Those are things that are just ticks in the right direction for society to get to. And yeah, you need to deal with issues of inequality, meaning raising the amount that you pay for, that people get for wages and whatnot. These aren't radical ideas. These are ideas that the American public basically agrees with. And yet, neither party does. This is not for George Soros to do this. That's my basic point. We as a society, as a country, should be able to do this. And to stand by like cucked husbands as a random billionaire basically usurps the role of the federal government. It's appalling to me. It's just disgusting to me. It's an ostentatious show of wealth when we have been basically neutered with our balls sitting in a jar on the wall because the political apparatus functions in the interests of the same 1% that's lauding its money in front of our face. It's almost like with Venezuela, where we've had to put sanctions on a country to prevent drugs and food and whatnot from coming into the country, then turn around and say, hey, we believe in freedom, and so we're going to offer you food. In which case the person just says, well, stop, get off at the road, and we can handle our own food. I'm going to leave this here. I don't want to keep this long. I just saw this and I was like, God, man, this is going to create a web of conspiracy theories associated around Soros. And beyond creating a web of conspiracy theories associated around Soros, these groups are going to be flushed with cash. We'll see what it means. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all.